A plastic bag has been seen lying on the floor of the deepest place on Earth. Not near a beach, not drifting beside a ship, nearly 7 miles down in the black water of the Mariana Trench, where the pressure could crush steel and sunlight has never reached. That alone feels impossible. But it is not even the full shock. Because the same place that held human trash also held living creatures, strange communities, and forms of life that science once thought could never exist there. By the time we reach the end of this, you will see why the bottom of the ocean says as much about us as it does about the deep. Picture the Pacific Ocean west of Guam. Far below the waves, the seafloor does not stay flat. It bends, drops, and opens into a scar so large you could stretch it across whole countries. That scar is the Mariana Trench. It runs for roughly 1,500 miles, but its real power is not its length. It is the drop. At its deepest known point sits Challenger Deep. That is the place most people mean when they talk about the bottom of the ocean. The depth is close to 10,900 meters. In feet, that is about 35,800. In everyday terms, if you dropped Mount Everest into it, the summit would still stay underwater. That depth is not random. The trench exists because one piece of Earth is sliding beneath another. The Pacific plate is older, colder, and denser than the plate beside it, so it sinks. It has been sinking for millions of years, slowly, relentlessly. The result is the deepest cut in the global ocean. Now imagine what that means for conditions down there. The water is just a few degrees above freezing. The darkness is total, not dim, total. Sunlight gives up long before you get anywhere close. And the pressure is so extreme that it rises to more than 1,000 times the air pressure at sea level. That number is hard to feel, so let's make it human. Deep-sea crews often compare it to the weight of dozens of jumbo jets pressing down on one person. Everything unprotected would collapse. Bones, lungs, metal, plastic, cameras, seals, lights. All of it would fail if it was not built for that world. The deep does not forgive weak design. For a long time, that helped shape a simple belief. The deepest ocean had to be empty. Pressure that high seemed like a final rule. No light meant no plants. No plants meant no food chain as most people understand it. Cold, darkness, silence, and crushing force all pointed to the same answer. Nothing much could live there. That idea lasted because no one could check it properly. The trench was too far, too hostile, and too expensive to reach. On maps, it was a number. In science, it was a question mark. In the public mind, it became a place almost outside the planet we know. Then, in 1960, 2 men decided to go there. Their names were Don Walsh and Jacques Piccard. They climbed into a small steel sphere attached to an unusual deep-diving craft called Trieste. It looked less like a sleek submarine and more like a machine assembled to survive a dare. It was not built for comfort. It was built to hold under pressure that could destroy almost anything else ever made by humans. The dive was simple in idea and terrifying in practice. Go down, reach the bottom, come back alive. The descent took hours. As Trieste sank deeper and deeper, the outside world disappeared into blackness. There was no view of coral reefs, no schools of fish, no blue water fading into indigo. There was only depth, pressure, and the knowledge that the farther they went, the farther they moved beyond rescue. Then came the crack. Partway down, one of the craft's outer window systems fractured. A sharp sound echoed through the vessel. In a place where every seal mattered, that noise was not small. Walsh and Piccard had to choose. Turn back, or keep going into the most extreme place on the planet with a damaged craft. They continued. That choice still feels hard to process. You and I hear a loud crack in a car, and we pull over. They heard 1 mile beneath the ocean and kept descending. That tells you something about deep exploration. It has always lived on the edge between courage and madness. When they finally touched the bottom, they were in a place no human had ever seen directly before. The seafloor was there beneath them. Fine sediment, stillness, weight beyond imagination, and in those brief minutes at the bottom, they reported seeing movement outside. One of the things they thought they saw was a flatfish. That detail became famous almost at once. It also became a problem. Because a fish at that depth did not fit what many scientists believed possible. Some people accepted the report. Others doubted it. Maybe the crew saw some other animal. Maybe memory filled in gaps. Maybe no vertebrate fish could survive there at all. And here is where the trench started to reveal one of its strangest traits. Even the first human story from the deepest place on Earth came back carrying uncertainty. Walsh and Piccard had no modern camera system with them. They did not collect the kind of visual proof people would demand later. Their dive was historic, but it was brief, about 20 minutes on the bottom. Enough to prove humans could get there. Not enough to settle everything they saw. So the deepest place on Earth entered a strange state. It had been visited, but not truly known. And then nobody went back for more than 50 years. That gap matters. We often tell exploration stories as if history moves in a straight line. First discovery, then more discovery, then understanding. But the deep ocean did not work that way. After Trieste, the bottom of Challenger Deep remained almost mythical again. not because it was unreachable in theory, but because reaching it was difficult, costly, and dangerous, and the scientific tools were still limited. During those decades, ocean science changed around the trench. Remotely operated vehicles improved. Landers dropped instruments and cameras into places humans did not want to risk. New sonar systems mapped parts of the seafloor. Little by little, the Hoddle Zone, the name for ocean depths deeper than 6,000 meters, started to feel less like fantasy and more like a frontier science could actually enter. Even so, a huge question stayed open: what really lives at the bottom of the trench? That question became more urgent as deep-sea biology advanced. Researchers found life in places once thought too harsh, even outside the trench itself. Hydrothermal vents changed ideas about what ecosystems need. Instead of sunlight, some organisms were living off chemistry. Bacteria could use chemical reactions the way plants use light. That was a radical shift. It meant life did not have to follow the surface rules. Still, Challenger Deep was another level. The depth was greater, the pressure was greater, the isolation was greater. Even if life could exist in unusual places, could it really thrive there? In 2012, someone decided to go find out in person. That someone was James Cameron. Most people knew him as a filmmaker, but on that dive, he was also an explorer in a highly specialized submersible called Deep Sea Challenger. Unlike Trieste, this craft carried better cameras and tools meant to do real science. The mission was not just to touch the bottom, it was to study it. Cameron went alone. That detail adds a different kind of tension. A solo dive to the deepest point on Earth means there is no one beside you in the sphere. No shared glance, no second voice, no one to hand you the next task. It is just you, the machine, and an environment that would erase you instantly if the machine failed. His descent was faster than Trieste's. He reached the bottom and found a scene he later described as desolate, flat, silty, alien. Not full of dramatic monsters moving through the dark, but a broad plain of fine sediment. That description mattered. It pushed back against the public fantasy that the deep must look like a science fiction movie, but there was life there. Small crustaceans known as amphipods appeared in the footage and samples. Microbial evidence mattered even more. Rock surfaces and sediment revealed signs of microscopic life. Later work connected these materials to new species, and to microbes adapted to huge pressure. Now, the trench was not dead. It was active in ways easy to miss if you only looked for big animals. That may be one of the first lessons the trench teaches. The deep does not always announce itself in grand forms. Sometimes the biggest discovery is that life is there at all. Cameron's dive also showed the limits of one visit. He planned for longer work on the bottom, but equipment trouble cut things short. That sounds familiar now. In deep exploration, even the best mission plans meet reality. A leak, a failed arm, a lighting issue, a pressure problem, a communication glitch. Down there, small technical failures become mission-defining events. So by 2012, we knew more, but not enough. Humans had reached the deepest place again. Science had returned with better tools. Yet the trench still held more questions than answers. Then came a different kind of explorer. Not someone aiming for one historic dive, but someone chasing repeat access. In 2019, Victor Vescovo descended in a submersible called Limiting Factor. The name tells you the ambition. This was not built to perform a single heroic stunt. It was designed to make full ocean depth dives repeatedly. That idea changed everything. Repeatability is where science gets serious. One dive can shock the world. A series of dives can start to explain it. Vescovo reached Challenger Deep and spent far longer on the bottom than earlier crews. Then he went back, and back again. Over time, he and his team built something earlier expeditions could not offer. They turned the deepest place on Earth from a rare human encounter into a site of repeated observation. That shift matters more than it sounds. When researchers can revisit the same location, they can compare what they see. They can map it better. They can collect more samples. They can test whether one surprising site was rare or normal. In other words, they can stop asking only, what is down there, and begin asking, how does it work? The answers got strange fast. Teams linked to these dives found amphipods, spoonworms, sea cucumbers, rocky outcrops, and signs of microbial activity. They also recorded snailfish at lesser, though still extreme depths in the trench region. These were not giant movie creatures. They were in some ways more interesting than that. They were real animals with bodies shaped by pressure, scarcity, and darkness. Take the Mariana snailfish. It became famous as one of the deepest known fish ever recorded. It does not look like a deep sea monster from fiction. It looks soft, pale, almost unfinished. But that softness is part of the design. A rigid body can be a problem under huge pressure. Flexible tissue helps. A swim bladder, the gas-filled organ many fish use to control buoyancy, would not work down there. So these fish solve the problem another way. Their cells also rely on chemistry that helps proteins keep functioning under pressure. One of the compounds researchers discuss is TMO. That is a stabilizing substance found in many deep-sea animals. In simple terms, it helps keep delicate biological machinery from failing under force. Without changes like that, life hits a wall, and even with them, there seems to be a limit. Scientists think fish probably cannot survive much deeper than a bit over 8,000 meters for long. That is why the old Trieste flatfish sighting remains disputed. It was too deep. Modern evidence points to snailfish as pushing close to the practical edge for vertebrate life. And below that, you still find life, but not fish like the ones we know from shallower seas. So if fish are nearly at their limit, what dominates the deeper trench floor? Small creatures, tough creatures, patient creatures. Amphipods are a good example. They look a bit like shrimp, though they are not the same thing. In the deep trench, they scavenge and feed in a world where food arrives slowly from above, or emerges through unusual chemistry below. Some trench amphipods show extreme adaptations, and researchers have described cases where aluminum appears in their outer structures, possibly helping with survival in that harsh environment. Then there are xenophyophores. These are giant single-celled organisms, which sounds like a contradiction until you realize nature does not care what sounds strange to us. A single cell can become surprisingly large in the deep sea. These organisms spread across the bottom like quiet architecture, shaping the habitat for smaller life around them. Sea cucumbers creep over the sediment, processing what falls from above. Worms move through the mud. Microbes inhabit particles, rock surfaces, and chemical niches invisible to the eye. It is less like a bustling city and more like a slow, hidden economy. Energy arrives, gets used, gets recycled, and every organism is built for shortage. And then, just when the trench was starting to look like a triumph of life, something else appeared. Not a strange animal, not a new species, not some geological wonder. Trash. Vescovo reported seeing what looked like a plastic bag and candy wrappers on the seafloor. Think about that for a second. Not near shore. Not in the top layers of the ocean where currents carry floating debris across the world. At the bottom, on the deepest known point of the planet. There is a special kind of horror in finding something ordinary where it has no right to be. A plastic bag is not dramatic on land. It is annoying, easy to ignore. You step around it in a parking lot. You see one caught in a fence. But on the floor of Challenger Deep, it becomes something else. It becomes evidence. Evidence that the human footprint is not just wide. It is vertical. It falls. And the deeper scientists looked, the worse that story became. Studies on trench creatures found microplastics in animals collected from deep ocean trenches. Microplastics are tiny plastic fragments, smaller than you can easily notice, often created as larger items break apart or as synthetic fibers shed from clothing and other materials. Once they enter the ocean, they do not stay put. They travel through currents, sink with marine snow, get eaten, get excreted, get eaten again, and move through food webs in ways that are difficult to fully track. Marine snow is one of those gentle names that hides a harsh truth. It sounds beautiful. In reality, it is the steady rain of dead plankton, waste, mucus, dust, and organic bits drifting down through the water column. In the deep ocean, it is food, but it can also carry pollution. So a creature waiting for dinner may also be swallowing our leftovers, our packaging, our fibers, our broken pieces. That discovery changed the emotional meaning of the trench. For years, the deepest place on Earth felt like the ultimate symbol of remoteness. If any corner of the planet could be untouched, this had to be it. No road, no city, no fishing village. No tourism crowd, no airport, no skyline. Just depth, darkness, and geological time. And yet, there it was. Human trash. But that was not even the strangest part. Because while the deepest place on Earth was proving to be polluted, it was also proving to be far more alive than older science had imagined. This is where the story turns from one shock into two. The trench is not a barren void ruined by debris. It is a living system, and our debris has reached it. That makes the place harder to think about. If it were dead, pollution would still be awful, but simpler. Instead, we are looking at contamination inside a place full of organisms that manage one of the hardest feats in biology. They adapted to survive where almost nothing should. And new expeditions kept finding more. Chinese-led missions using the submersible Fenduje, also called Striver, pushed this story further. These dives gathered large numbers of sediment samples from the Mariana Trench and nearby extreme depths. Genetic analysis of the collected material revealed huge microbial diversity, with a striking share of the species apparently new to science. That matters because microbes are not side characters in the deep ocean. They are the base system. They drive chemistry, recycle matter, and shape what larger organisms can do. If you want to understand the trench, you have to stop thinking first about sharks and start thinking about microbes. Many of these organisms are pressure-loving. Scientists use the word piezophiles for microbes that thrive under high pressure. Some can survive conditions that would shut down ordinary cells. Their membranes, enzymes, and internal chemistry are tuned to a world of constant force. To us, that is extraordinary. To them, it is normal. And then came one of the most stunning discoveries yet. Researchers reported dense communities of tube worms and bivalves at extreme depth in the Mariana region, down to around 9,433 meters. That is astonishingly deep for an animal community built around chemosynthesis. Instead of depending on sunlight, these ecosystems use chemicals like methane seeping through the seafloor. Bacteria process the chemicals, and larger organisms either host those bacteria or feed within that system. This is the kind of finding that should reset how you picture the deep. Forget the idea of the trench as just empty mud. In some places, it supports clustered communities, with animals packed together around sources of chemical energy. Tube worms can sway in the dark where no morning has ever happened. Clams can blanket the sediment in dense patches. Microbial mats can spread like pale snow over the seafloor. And if that exists in one trench, what else exists in others we have barely visited? That question matters beyond Earth's oceans. Chemosynthetic life has long interested scientists because it shows that sunlight is not the only starting point for ecosystems. If life on our own planet can flourish in black water by using chemistry from the crust, then worlds with hidden oceans, like some icy moons, start to look less impossible. The deep sea does not just change ocean science, it changes the imagination of where life might be possible anywhere. But before we go too far outward, come back to the trench floor. Imagine sitting in a submersible there. Your lights cut across fine sediment. The world outside is black except where the beams touch. You're not hearing whale song. You're not seeing reefs. You're watching a place stripped down to survival. And then, in that beam, you see straight edges. That is the moment the title of this story truly lands. Nature rarely makes perfect packaging shapes. A bag corner, a wrapper fold, a flat printed fragment, these things look wrong against the seafloor. Even before you identify them, your brain knows they do not belong. That is what Vescovo described. Something sharp and unnatural. Something out of place. Something human. There is a reason that moment hits harder than big statistics. A statistic can stay abstract. Millions of tons of plastic enter the ocean every year. We hear that and nod because the number is too large to feel. But one bag at the bottom of the world is a picture. It is a single object in a single impossible place. It collapses the distance between everyday waste and planetary consequence. And it does one more thing. It destroys the comforting story that the deep will hide our mess. For a long time, the ocean has been treated as a place where things go away. Waste goes overboard, debris sinks, out of sight becomes out of mind. But the trench shows the truth. Away is not gone. It is somewhere, often somewhere alive. How does a plastic bag get nearly 7 miles down? There is no single road. Some items sink outright once they lose buoyancy or collect growth. Some break into smaller fragments that hitch rides on organic particles. Some get eaten near the surface, then pass downward through waste and death. Some are carried by currents that move not just across the sea, but through its depths and complex layers. The ocean is not a simple tank. It is a moving system. What enters it can end up far from where it began. The trench itself may also act as a kind of trap. Its steep sides and shape can funnel sinking material downward. Once particles enter that geography, they may accumulate. In a sad way, the deepest place can become a final collection point for things the rest of the ocean no longer holds up. That includes pollutants beyond visible trash. Persistent chemicals, heavy metals, and microplastics can settle into sediments. Organisms feeding on or in those sediments can take them up. Predators and scavengers can move them onward. The Hoddle Zone may seem isolated from surface life, but it is connected by falling matter every single day. This is why tissue contamination in deep animals shocked scientists and the public alike. It was not just that pollution had arrived. It had entered bodies. When plastic reaches a remote seafloor, you might still tell yourself the impact is mostly cosmetic. Ugly, but limited. When tiny fragments show up in animals, that excuse dies. Now the system itself is involved. Digestion, feeding, uptake, exposure, long-term stress, all of it becomes part of the story. And we still do not know the full biological cost. That uncertainty is important. Good science does not pretend to know more than it does. Researchers are still working out how deep sea species respond to different pollutants over time. Some impacts may be subtle, some may be severe, some may interact with food scarcity, pressure stress, reproduction, or microbial processes in ways we do not yet understand. The deep keeps secrets partly because experiments there are so hard to run. But uncertainty does not mean comfort. It means we may have changed a place before we even understood it. That may be the most disturbing pattern in this whole story. Humans reached the bottom of the ocean and discovered two things at once. First, life is tougher and stranger than we guessed. Second, our reach is longer and dirtier than we wanted to believe. The trench also forces us to rethink the word remote. Remote to a human body, yes. Remote to a tourist, absolutely. Remote to rescue crews, almost beyond argument. But remote to chemistry, currents, and falling particles? Not really. The ocean connects places that look separate on maps. A fiber from a shirt, a fragment from a bottle, a bag from a store. These can begin in the ordinary world and end in the Hadal world. That is why the trench matters, even if you never see the ocean. It is not just about a distant record depth. It is about a truth hidden inside that depth. Human systems do not stop at the edge of what we can survive. They keep moving through trade, waste, runoff, manufacturing, and daily habits. Our influence arrives where our bodies cannot. And yet, the trench is not only a warning, it is also a place of genuine wonder. Think about what the discoveries there say about life itself. Microbes living under crushing pressure, amphipods scavenging in the cold dark, snailfish pushing close to the depth limit for vertebrates, chemosynthetic communities feeding off methane seeping from the crust. All of this exists in a world with no sunlight and almost no human witnesses. That changes the emotional shape of the story. At first, the trench sounds like death. Then it becomes a place of survival, then a place of pollution, then a place of scientific humility. It keeps refusing a single label. Even the exact depth is still being refined. Better sonar and mapping systems continue to sharpen our view of Challenger Deep. In one recent dive with Don Wright and Victor Vescovo, the team reported a depth near 10,119 meters, with a small margin of error, while also testing full ocean depth side scan sonar. That may sound like a technical footnote, but it matters. We are still measuring the deepest place on Earth more precisely than before. Decades after the first descent, the map is still improving. There is something beautiful in that. The planet still holds places where even the number is not finished. Dawn Wright's dive carried symbolic weight, too. She became one of the very few people ever to visit Challenger Deep, and the first black person to do so. That matters, because exploration shapes how humanity imagines itself. Who gets to see the most extreme places on Earth is part of the story of science as much as the instruments are. And those instruments are becoming extraordinary. Full ocean depth submersibles, advanced sonar, high-pressure sample handling, genetic sequencing, robotic landers, all of these tools are changing the trench from a legend into a research site. But even with those advances, the place has not lost its power. If anything, each new expedition makes it stranger. Not because we know less, but because every answer opens more doors. Take the first fish debate. Once the question was whether any fish could live at such depths. Now the question is where the limit lies and why. Take microbes. Once the question was whether anything could live there at all. Now the question is how many unknown lineages are still hidden in the mud. Take the seafloor itself. Once it was just a depth point. Now it is habitat, geology, chemistry, and history wrapped together. And then take the plastic bag. Because no matter how much wonder the trench inspires, that image keeps returning. A bag on the deepest floor, candy wrappers in the dark, a sea cucumber near debris, small signs of a species that has managed to spread its materials into every layer of the ocean. If you are looking for a single sentence that explains the modern human relationship with Earth, it might be this. We can pollute places we barely understand. But there is another sentence standing beside it. Life can survive in places we once thought impossible. The Mariana Trench holds both truths at once. That is why the place feels so gripping. It is not simply a nightmare or miracle. It is both a warning and a celebration of resilience. It shows the toughness of life and the carelessness of the species studying it. It shows a planet richer than we knew and more altered than we hoped. And maybe that is what makes the deep ocean so emotionally powerful. It strips away excuses. Down there, there's nowhere to hide. Not for biology, not for geology, not for us. The trench keeps asking a quiet question. If our waste can reach the deepest point on Earth, where exactly do we imagine away is? For more than 60 years, explorers have gone down in small spheres and stronger machines to look into darkness no human eye had seen before. What they found was not a dead end. It was a living system, still unfolding. A place where chemistry stands in for sunlight. A place where fish reach their absolute limit. A place where worms and clams build communities nearly 6 miles down. A place where microbes rewrite the known tree of life. And somehow, a place where human garbage has already arrived. That is the contradiction the trench leaves us with. The deepest place on Earth is both one of the most extreme environments ever studied and one of the clearest mirrors of the surface world above it. Maybe that is why these dives matter so much. Not just because they break records, not just because they make headlines, but because they force us to look at what kind of species we are. Curious enough to descend where almost no one can go. Clever enough to build machines that survive impossible pressure. Careless enough to leave traces even there. So when people ask what they found at the bottom of the ocean, the honest answer is not one thing. They found life. They found limits. They found evidence that sunlight is not required for whole ecosystems. They found that the rules of biology are wider than we thought. They found creatures that look delicate yet survive crushing force. They found maps still unfinished. They found mysteries that remain open, and they found us. Not our bodies, not our cities, not our voices, our leftovers. That may be the most unsettling discovery of all, because it means the deep ocean is not some untouched outside world. It is part of our world, connected to our habits, altered by our choices, still magnificent, still mysterious, but no longer safely separate from what we do at the surface. And maybe that is where the story should end, not with fear, but with a harder kind of wonder, the kind that asks us to grow up. The Mariana Trench is still there tonight, black and cold and deeper than most minds can picture. Microbes are still working in the mud. Amphipods are still moving through the sediment. Chemical seeps may still be feeding life in silence. A place that once looked empty is full of process and persistence. And somewhere down there, on the floor of the deepest known ocean trench, human debris has already made landfall. If that detail surprised you most, I want to know why. Was it the plastic bag itself, or the fact that living creatures were sharing that same space with it? Tell me in one sentence. And if you want more true stories like this, where the real world turns out stranger than fiction, subscribe to Exploreverse and turn on notifications. We have a lot more to explore, and some of the most unbelievable places on Earth are still very real.